Hello and welcome back. As promised before, we're going to be highly focusing on rendering now the shots that we're currently working on. So in this case, what we're going to start off is to how we can then use movie render queue and then render it under Lumen's rendering. And I'll show you how to set it up. So in this case, currently we are dealing with Lumens lighting, including all the environments, global illumination and reflections are being generated thanks to Lumens. We also have the ability to change the path tracer and compare the results to see what outcomes will be the best to work with. But because for now, the main challenge for us is to focus on Lumens first. So we're going to go back to our lid and let's start focusing on our, in this case, shot that we have just here to present it. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to click on this icon here. But first things first, I want you to also be mindful because you need to enable a plugin called Movie Render Queue. So once it's enabled, make sure it will ask you to restart, but also make sure to enable Movie Render Queue with additional render passes. And for the reasons because we're actually going to use different render passes to edit them later using DaVinci, which will come later in this course. But for now, let's make sure we turn those movie render queue as well as movie render queue additional render passes. And once we restart it, let's go back and also start working on our settings. What I ideally tend to do, I'm actually going to use something called constant variable collection. What does this do is actually helps you to test the constant variables before even rendering or playing the game and so on to see what each constant variable will bring different outcomes inside Unreal project itself. So for example, you want to test some constant variable and you're not sure how, because you either do it here or you just simply use this constant variable editor and basically it will do the same thing. So in this case, I'm going to call this Lumens. And also, if you have this issue trying to turn this on, you cannot find it, sometimes Unreal by default is not activating some of the constant variable because the plugin has not been enabled. So in order to enable it, you just have to go to plugins and type in constant variable. And you just go and select this to be ticked. Then you select constant variable editor, and then it will ask you again possibly to restart it. Then you have to click on restart. And with this one set up, I can just go and load our constant variable here. As you can see, editor just comes as blank, but that's fine because this is what we're going to do first is to then click on the constant variable add, and then we start looking at the commands that we want to test it. So at the moment, I'm going to start with toner quality. And what does this do? And even though before selecting this constant variable, you can see when you hover over this constant variable, it will highlight the definition of what it does and what improvements does it make to the entire quality of the overall post-process. And this is usually ranged into different categories. So if I press enter, it will automatically set this to value 5. And it even tells you what types of the category it belongs to. In this case, scalability. It may sound a bit familiar because scalability is also here available and tells you what types of level of, in this case, quality that we're expecting while we are setting to different levels of the scalability, depending whether you want to make it more beautiful or less beautiful and increase the performance. But it's just mainly because we're using for cinematic reasons due to the fact that we want to render at the highest quality. And what we'll do, it will basically do the same thing as this one. But in this case, you want to make it even slightly better by increasing the quality to its maximum. So the renders look much more clear and more interesting. So another thing I will do also is add tone per sharpen. As you can see, again, it will tell you what improvements does it make to it. So it just gives it a little bit more compatibility in clearly improving quality by sharpening its quality of the final image. So the moment is set to 1. Let's add another one, motion blur, and that's going to be our quality. Set to default by 4. We need to do the same thing too, but in this case we are going to do blur separable. And what it does, it gives you that extra pass, a much higher quality when you render motion blur. And set it to as it is to 1. I'm going to do the same thing for depth of field quality. Set to 4. I'll definitely also go for we call it screen percentage. What it does is basically increase the amounts of pixels on a lower res image of rendered sequence. So what that means, it will pack more pixels, and ours will make a little bit sharper quality by sort of like upscaling the image. Even the image stays at, let's say, 1080 or 4K, but it will make it feel like it's a higher resolution than it's been previously set up to. So in this case, it's set to 150%, which means it will be 1/2 times sharper quality. Another thing I will definitely go for, because we're using ray tracing. So in this case, I'm going to also set at ray tracing translucency, which in this case, we don't have to do anymore because our ray tracing is already enabled. So I'm going to look at it very quickly again. I check our ray tracing set on, which is because we've done this previously, which is fine. So that we are getting natural, but also realistic glass reflections on translucent materials. And the last but not least, it's also something which I don't think it's necessary, but it's worth a try. It's called Lumen, and in this case, dot diffuse indirect SAO. And what does it really do? It creates the surface sampling ambient occlusion, and based on the material that has ambient occlusion enabled, which means you can actually have ambient occlusion on the objects that you, let's say, have, but it has to be also enabled inside the material, which means it has to have some sort of like ambient occlusion texture assigned to this material. But because we don't really use this, so I'm going to just turn this off. With this setup, we can then go presets, save presets as, and we call it CVE_lumens. Save it. Yes, I want to replace it. And then we're good to go. So now next thing is to use the sequencer that we already have, and I'm going to use to render the movie. So we are currently on the menu of the movie render queue. And what we're going to do is start adding our settings. So we're going to use for this EXR. Let's remove JPEG, or you can just disable, or you can press on your JPEG sequence, then hit delete to remove. And then at the moment, what we want to also mention is the reason why we use EXR layer, so that we can use the stencils, this case custom masks for different layers as we go into edit them inside DaVinci. So in this case, we need to make sure that we are also enabling multi-layer. With PIS, it's absolutely fine. So now let's go and also add the additional post-processing materials, which will be used to render depth of field as well as motion blur. So I'm going to enable those two. So this is for depth of field, and this is for motion blur. And the next thing I'm going to also add is console variable. So we have already a preset that we just created. So we're just going to pick up SVE_lumens. And also let's go and add anti-aliasing. This is very important because we're actually using motion blur. And we want to make sure that every time the movement of the car behaves very naturally and keeps that motion blur being generated as the motion moves on for the car within the track. We also want to make sure that we don't get any artifacts along the way as we go into render. So in this case, I'm going to set this to temporal sample count. So let's say 16 to 6, which is going to be our spatial sample, because we want to make sure we want to increase the number of temporal sample counts and keep a little bit lower for spatial sample counts, because in this case, we clearly care about the motion blur of the wheels. Because if you go set them lower, the motion blur of the wheels may not look as exciting. So I tend to set a temporal sample a little bit higher and a bit lower for spatial sample count. Another thing is to make sure we overwrite anti-aliasing, so we don't use any. And I always go to 32 for both render warm-up count as well as engine warm-up counts. Just be clear also for the post-process, I will also go quickly check our post-process and motion blur. And this is my settings I'm using for. So I'm actually setting to 24 FPS, so it matches the motion of those wheels via sequencer. And also keep an eye on the other specs as an amount and max. So feel free to change the amount. I set to like the lower the possible, and we're good to go. The only thing what's left is, of course, set our different passes. So I'm going to use different, all of them, different rendering for reflections, unlit, detail lighting, lighting only, as well as different unlit. Also, another thing I need to mention is that the way you can see all this is also you can enable some of these lighting modes here. It tells you and shows you what exactly it looks like, all the reflections, and so on. Detail lighting, lighting only, and we can also set to unlit. and this will render into one layer. And this all going to be rendered under the same file, which is EXR. And go back to lit, and then I'm also going to set the game overrides for the highest render quality. And what we have so far, it's good to go. I'm going to make sure I use a playback range, which is based on this sequence here. And what I tend to go is to go 4K, but you don't have to, depends on your graphic card. And if you want to keep it lower resolution, that's absolutely fine. So you can go 1080. But for me, I'm going to go set it to, in this case, to 2K. And also make sure you save it somewhere in the directory. So in this case, you change your directory however you want to. I'm happy to go and then set this custom play range. And in this case, my shot renders starting from somewhere, let's say 65 in mine, until it reaches towards the end, which I'm very satisfied with. So let's say it's 139. And then you click render local. Of course, it's gonna take you some time. It might also tell you to compile shaders, just like it's shown now here, and then we'll start getting ready to start rendering. Now, as you can see, we have all our sequence here for the that we just created for our car. And there you go, we got our first sequence done in Lumens. And now we're going to carry on and show you how to then render this exactly the same shot but done under Path Tracer in the next lesson. So thank you guys, and I'll see you in the next one.